We now move on to the last session of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to day 2 of National Wash Conclave 2022 and a hearty welcome to Yamuna Hall. Thank you for joining us to attend the session on medium, channels and tools for communications on improving hand hygiene and menstrual. We now move on to the last session of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to day 2 of National Wash Conclave 2022 and a hearty welcome to Yamuna Hall. Thank you for joining us to attend the session on medium, channels and tools for communications on improving hand hygiene and menstrual hygiene behaviors at Panchayati level. Panchayati Raj institution members are responsible for local and village level development. They play a crucial role in connecting communities with key services on wash, sanitation, and hygiene. These members' role as basic unit of local administration can make them key enablers at the ground level, rendering them as key stakeholders in driving wash practices among community members. Panchayati Raj institution members play an important role in engaging and mobilizing their communities to adopt key hygiene behaviors. They can also balance the demand and supply and can create an enabling environment at the ground level. It is therefore very critical to optimize their role in driving social and behavior change communication and improving uptake of wash practices among communities. Engaging with PRI members and establishing sustained communication with these stakeholders will help us in understanding the current gaps in knowledge and key wash behaviors around wash, thus improving the wash outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Shalini Prasad, who will be leading this very interesting panel discussion. Shalini Prasad has a diverse experience of more than 20 years in public advocacy, strategic communications in the areas of wash, public health, HIV/AIDS, climate change, and the current COVID-19 pandemic as well. She worked with various national and international organizations, including World Health Organization, USAID, Population Council, PFI, Plan International, etc. She has been with Unicef since 2011, leading WASH-related communication portfolio and providing social and behavior change communication technical assistance to Government of India flagship programs like Jal Jeevan Mission, Swachh Bharat Mission, etc. She played a very crucial role in leading development of multiple communication training packages, and one such prominent package is the community approaches to sustainable sanitation. Over to you, Ms. Shalini Prasad.
Thank you, Shelly. We'll just see if all the panelists have joined. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the session. We'll just give 5 minutes to see if everybody is joined. Will Rahul let me know if everyone has joined? Rahul, let me know when to start.
Yes, ma'am, we can start.
Okay. So I hope all of you have been attending other sessions of this very enriching conference as well for advancing WASH. I was just listening to the last session on healthcare facilities. So without much ado, today I have the pleasure of welcoming an expert panel to discuss the critical role of PRI members in enabling communities to utilize both WASH services as well as driving positive WASH practices among them. We also have PRI members with us from UP and Bihar participating in this session. So let me welcome Ms. Zoya Rizvi, Deputy Commissioner of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. She's worked very closely on hand hygiene and MHM. Mr. Vijay Shankar Kanthan, who's the SPC specialist in the Unicef State Office of Gujarat. Ms. Soumya Bhardwaj, Director, Capacity Building and Operations in Praxis Institute for Participatory Practices, in the Delhi office. Ms. Pratima Kumar, founder of Gaurav Gramin Mahila Vikas Manch. Panchayat Pradhan Rekha from the Co-Panchayat Chitrakoot in Uttar Pradesh, and Panchayat Pradhan Abhishek Arnav, Kehalgaon, Bhagalpur from Bihar. आप सभी लोगों का स्वागत है। शुरू करने के पहले मैं ये बताना चाहती हूँ कि ये जो सेशन है, it has been divided in two segments. In the first part, we will have a panel discussion on the role of national and state governments in creating the enabling environment for PRIs for effective communication of key WASH behaviors. And we will have special focus on hand hygiene and menstrual hygiene management. And the second part will focus on the implementation on the ground and experience sharing from the Pradhans who have joined us today and have taken our time. So for the attendees, we will take the question at the end of the second segment. In the meantime, while you are listening to the conversation and the panel discussion, please share your questions in the chat box, and also mention the name of the panelist to whom you would like to address the question. So let me begin the session with some of the session objectives and a brief introduction to hand hygiene and menstrual hygiene management to set the context. Just give me 2 minutes to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Ji.
Okay, so the session will basically discuss the national and state strategies of how both at the national level and at the state level policymakers are investing in PRI capacities as communicators for enabling adoption of positive WASH behaviors. We will especially focus on hand hygiene and MHM as shared earlier. We will, because the session is about channels and tools, we will especially focus on channels and tools that are available and are also required to enable PRIs to effectively conduct community engagement and mobilization, which will ensure positive shifts in norms around hand hygiene and MHM. And also we'll have experience sharing of the potential and power of PRIs as key advocates and community leaders who are driving positive behavior change among communities at the ground level. So just to reiterate some of the benefits of hand washing with soap, I'm sure all of you are much aware, but just because we are talking about these two very critical behaviors, I just want to highlight that the COVID pandemic has again brought forth this entire preventive behavior as the first defense of preventing not only COVID, but many other diseases, and it includes many respiratory diseases, diarrhea, and we don't know for any kind of prevention of germs, we really need to have hand washing with soap. And also hand washing with soap at critical times is the most cost-effective way of preventing illnesses and the stop of germs. So if we look at some of the data, you can see here that diarrhea is almost reduced by 30%, acute respiratory illnesses by up to 20%, and even COVID infection by 36%. So what has been the key learnings on hand washing during COVID? if we look at several assessments that have been done by UNICEF partners, the government, both at global level and even in India, we see that the pandemic has resulted in a global increase in hand washing behavior. Though it varies across countries, but there is a definite increase in India as well. The hand washing that is being reported at critical times associated with COVID transmission, that especially, like when you are coming from outside or sneezing, that has also increased. Now, if we look at proxy indicators of soap and hand sanitizer, we also see that there is a shift and there is an increase in demand and sales for both these things. So if you see, the entire pandemic has made hand washing a more publicly visible behavior, and it has contributed to a kind of development. I mean, it's in the process, but we can kind of sustain this momentum and develop a social norm if we continue having this enabling environment around hand washing with soap. It has also, some of our assessment is also showing that, self-efficacy and the perceived control has increased around hand washing with soap. And these can be predictors of future behaviors, that this behavior will be sustained among people who have adopted it during the pandemic and are regularly washing their hands. There are also some other learnings which are specifically related to behavior change communication. Once we say that the rates have increased and it has to be sustained and supported, we also see that these rates have been increased because the prime motive behind it has been fear, especially in the early stages of the pandemic. But we also know from various studies that fear-based changes are likely to be short-lived. Because any behavior change initiative, including hand washing with soap, really needs multiple factors to be assessed before any kind of program can be designed, so that we really understand what is the context, what are the specific motivations, what are the triggers, what are the social determinants, and putting this all together. Only then we can create that environment, or then only we can create the messages that actually lead to behavior change. So, I mean, if we are talking about hygiene program, it needs to be delivered over an extended period of time, and it needs to combine a range of delivery channels. And of course, to do this, we need some kind of investments and capacities and skills, so that behavior change communication can actually go down to the lowest level. And we also need to have a universal approach. Both WHO and UNICEF are coming out with this entire universal approach towards hand hygiene, where there is a need to establish the facilities as well as the entire behavior change component to ensure that it becomes a social norm. Again, coming to menstrual hygiene management, a topic which is well known by most people who are attending and the panelists, but just to reiterate that it is a global priority, it is one of the key outcomes of the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is indeed a reinforced commitment by our government as well. I'll not go into the details of this particular slide, but I just want to highlight that the potential impact of investing in MHM is great, be it empowerment of women, be their physical and mental health, be their education, the climate change and the environment part, or the economic part. So there is a huge potential in a variety of areas if we invest in MHM. And it really creates a ripple effect, and it can lead to a much healthier and stronger life, especially of women, families, and societies. Excuse me. As you're well aware, menstrual hygiene norms, there are so many norms that hinder the practice and demand of services. Girls are often unaware of the onset of menstruation. There is a culture of silence that is pervading around it. There is lack of preparation. There is no knowledge. There are poor hygiene practices that really impact the girl's self-esteem, confidence, and personal development. There are taboos that affect mobility of girls. There is no freedom of choice. It affects their education as well as overall participation. At the same time, we also see there is a huge lack of menstrual friendly facilities to manage periods. I'm really sorry about this. Probably post-COVID effects. So I just wanted to highlight the complexity of communication around MHM. So like I was saying earlier, if you just look at this figure, there is this entire culture of silence around MHM. There is poor awareness, there is poor engagement of especially of men and boys in this case. The information is very poor. And at the same time, there is a huge gap in the provision of services. So coming back to our main topic, which is the role of PRIs in communication for hand hygiene as well as MHM. So I think we will discuss it as and when this session proceeds. And we start with the first question of the panelists. Just a minute, Zoya. I'm just experiencing some technical glitches.
Yeah, we are quite used to them every day. We have these. Yeah, please go ahead.
Please excuse me. So Zoya, Government of India national flagship programs on health, nutrition, education, drinking water and sanitation have positioned hand washing with soap as a critical behavior. And there are various policies and guidelines in your programs that really embed hand washing with soap as a critical behavior, and it has been promoted as a huge way as part of the COVID appropriate behaviors. So can you share with us how the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare plans to sustain this momentum around hand washing with soap?
Thanks, Shalini. Am I audible, everybody?
Yes, I'm so sorry because of my cough. I'm breaking up again and again.
No issues. No, thank you for having me on this panel discussion. I would not like to repeat what you have said, because you basically covered about what government has broadly done about the COVID control, and the fact that the simple act of hand washing per se has the potential to avert preventable deaths, infection. You mentioned diarrhea, you mentioned ARI also you mentioned. So it has a potential to lead to improvement in healthy lifestyle. Health outcomes are much better. There's progress, and less children fall ill. So there'll be progress in education, progress in access to education, equity. And of course, with water, sanitation and hygiene, we will hopefully achieve this sustainable development goals, like you mentioned. Just to take it from there is that a lot of us know about the National Family Health Survey, and we do know that National Family Health Survey shows there's a big contrast in the access to soap and water. So rural access as compared to urban is about 1:5. So if out of 5, only 1 has access to safe water and soap in rural as compared to almost 4 or 5 who have. So that is the kind of discrepancy which we are living with in this country. But yes, with the Swachh Bharat Mission, a lot of this has been improving, and I'm sure that the NFHS 5 data, detailed data which will come to us, will show a marked improvement in the access. Just to go about from what you mentioned about how the ministry is planning to sustain the momentum. Yes, COVID was one, I think the only bright part of having COVID was the frequent and proper hand washing, which began with soap as a preventive measure from prevention of spread of COVID was a big thing. And it really, I think, catapulted a lot of our hygiene programs out into the open, out in the forefront, because people realize that health and hygiene go hand in hand. You can't be healthy and not be hygienic. it. So that is a very important thing which has come out of it. So to sustain the momentum which you mentioned, I would just like to say 4 or 5 things. First is that that ministry has already been advocating about the importance of hand hygiene in the National Deworming Day, in which the deworming tablets are distributed and IFA tablets are distributed, wherein it is important that children are taught in schools or Anganwadi that they have to wash their hands before they eat either of the tablets. That has already been going on. So that has been further strengthened, whether it is supporting the behavior change in schools as well as Anganwadi. So that has happened. Second, I would say that menstrual hygiene scheme per se is being implemented by the government for a long time, more than a decade now. But now hand washing as a part of access to menstrual hygiene management has become very critical. And on one side, the government is talking about access to subsidized napkins and talking about maintenance of menstrual hygiene. On the other hand, we also talk about the key element of hand washing during the health education sessions with the adolescent girl, which the Asha takes. So that has become the second thing. Third, I would say also is that in the Ayushman Bharat School Health and Wellness Program, which you may know, it's a partnership between education and health. Hand washing is given a very important part, because once in one of the modules, which is nutrition, health and sanitation, it is one of the components which is taught to the teachers so that they also transact in the activities in school. So that is the third thing. Fourth, I would say is that already within the National Deworming Day, the health departments have been informed and trained to interact with the ministry, with the Department of Women and Child, as well as with the Department of Drinking Water or Public Health, as it is called in different states, so that all the basis of worm infestation, control of worm is kind of incorporated within the implementation of the NDD days, which we have in February and August. Another thing which I heard in the previous session was about the NQAS, the National Quality Assessment. That is one thing which is being now again come to the forefront in all health institutions, programs like NQAS and Lakshya. They are working to ensure that the infection control practices become more and more critical, especially ensuring that the health outcomes for the mothers and the newborns in the hospitals become much better, so that this is by the ensuring that the availability of hand washing facilities and soap and running water is there in all the health institutions, especially around the labor rooms and the OTs. So both these programs, NQAS and Lakshya, are working to ensure that sanitation and access to water, soap and hand washing facilities is there. But I think I will not take it away from this. So much of health is there. But just to say, I would like to wrap up this argument by saying that I would like to basically underline the fact that universal hand hygiene has now become a reality. And each of us, I think all the people who are listening to me here, all of you who have joined us online, listening or watching, each of us has to play a role. All of us has to, no matter how old we are, girl, boy, transgender, whichever part we belong to, working, not working, at home, or we are traveling, wherever, we have to advance the issue of hand washing, and all of us individually have to become what I will call as hand washing heroes, so that we promote hand washing both at home, at office, in schools, in workplaces, and all within the community. So I think that is all I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Zoya. I think you've really put forward the point of universalization of hand hygiene very well. Also, the convergence which you spoke about, it clearly means that states would have a very important and critical role to play in ensuring that there is continuous and consistent communication on hand washing with soap. So let me come to Vijay and ask him, what are the state strategies that ensure that PRIs are skilled in communicating about these core wash issues?
Thank you, Shalini. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for letting us be a part of this very important, interesting discussion. And I think, Shalini, you set the stage really well in terms of, I just wanted to reinforce, I have a couple of slides, but I'm going to talk to it. I'm not going to show it here. So it's more interactive, and we'll have a discussion around, it's a discussion that we can, I look forward to having some chat questions coming up with chat. The whole hygiene, whether it's hand hygiene, we are talking about mental hygiene. Let's just take a step back and look at in the last few years, or ever since this has been a movement we're looking at a journey that's been pretty much led by, it's been a Gram Panchayat led movement, a lot of our focus during the last couple of decades. If you see, a shift has been the whole community approaches that you've also spearheaded nationally, and that we've taken forward in the states. When we speak of collective change, whether we look at flagship missions, health, SBM especially, and others, even in nutrition portion for that matter, we're looking at community approaches that Gram Panchayat plays a critical role. And the whole hygiene the conversation that we're having today, the first primary, the basic thing are about bringing collective change through community engendering participation of communities, that communities own up the process. And that is a key to make the change happen, whether it's about getting children in school to wash hands, whether it's about other critical times when we want families, communities to practice this behavior. To be able to engender that change, PRIs become really critical. And how have they gone about doing it? I mean, whether it's about prioritizing resource allocation at the level, or whether it's about mobilizing other forms of resources, community mobilization, and including bringing in support from various sections of society, PRIs become important. Creating equitable access through, whether it's through public utilities and common spaces, or helping nudge changes in communities. When we speak of when we want to create an enabling environment for people to adopt, to change norms, when we look at adopting new practices and sustaining behaviors, we're looking at helping nudge change in communities, and PRIs become very critical. And our knowledge of being able to transact this, it's important to have good understanding of individual, community, and institutional barriers. And at that level, it's very important the way we can, and from UNICEF's perspective, our focus on equity, ensuring last mile populations, reaching last mile groups, and to be able to even and to effectively leverage and amplify effectiveness of community-based events, PRIs become they become the fulcrum. They are the center of all that we are looking at from a social and behavior change perspective. And most importantly, what you and Dr. Zoya very clearly said, bringing in convergence to be able to we are today in a mission mode. I mean, across all our socials, across all our service delivery interventions, we are in a mission mode. We are in terms of our service delivery. How PRIs become really important for us to be able to sustain this mission mode, target driven approach in service delivery with equally powerful, strong community owned, bottom up, say ownership demand for such services. It's a very important so what strategies, I mean, you asked me about state level strategies and how do we engage for any, especially our talk today is about hand hygiene and menstrual hygiene across the board for all social and behavior change interventions, and very focused. The first and the foremost thing, and this is something that comes across whether we look at our SBM planning for the AIP, the bottom up processes that we have tried to support from a state perspective, to be able to look at integrated planning from the Swachhata Action Plan, how it would get embedded into the AIP at a district level, a national level, at the state level, and to be able to link it to GPDP processes, micro planning at the community level. That's the form, and to be able to speak about demand, to be able to map barriers to behaviors at that level, a very systematic, integrated, evidence-based planning to understand what are those local barriers that stop people from adopting these behaviors, that what is it that what are those bottlenecks that actually and norms that actually are not helping people sustain practices that they have tried. So it becomes, that is the first strategy that as at the state level that we work with the departments across the board. So our the first step is to be able to bring in SPC, social behavior change planning, integrating it into the AIP process, and how we could use evidence cost, how we could use behavioral insights that we gain for different sections of population into the planning processes. Once we have a planning and say, then the most important step that we then look at is across the board the capacity building of functionaries, capacity building of Gram Panchayat functionaries to be able to look at across the say service delivery value chain departments, whether it's the water sanitation, whether it's around health. How well have we be able to create capacities of functionaries at all levels to be able to transact behavior change, especially from the behavior from an interpersonal communication perspective? Are we able to create community dialogue situations? So our work with Ashas and Anganwadis, Ashas in health, or Anganwadi, the various training modules, the community approaches to sustainable sanitation that we have we've taken forward in SBM. All of these modules actually help us transact very strategic, focused community level capacity building initiatives that actually engage GPs to be able to create that space for community dialogue where they're able to talk about the need for change and how they are able to facilitate, how they can facilitate that change at an individual level, at a family level, and at the community level. Another important state level strategy at the state level, a very important piece to this is to be able to pull this together, as to be able to create strategic partnerships. Strategic partnerships, I say this word very carefully because there are a lot of players who are critical for us to be able to build this change process with panchayats. We need civil society organizations, community-based organizations, local grassroots entities that are operational in the field. We need support from we look at those strategic partnerships, for us to be able to leverage community-based platforms, for us to engage with communities sustainably, for us to bring in research and evidence, for example, through academia, for us to bring media on board, for us to look at, those curating those civil society partnerships that support community mobilization efforts, bringing in youth networks, youth groups on board, working with, say, SHGs, looking at, in a state like Gujarat, we have large partnership with dairy cooperatives and then other forms of community networks that we work with. So that at the state level, one of the important strategies for us is to be able to help curate these strategies at the district level, sub-district level, for the conversation to be meaningful, productive, and long-term and sustainable. And then finally, our session today is about disseminating locally relevant messaging using diverse media traditional platforms. Here comes an important step for us to be able to create content, adapt content that is being developed nationally, to be able to take it more to local, culturally relevant contexts that GPs can use, that can reach families, that can actually touch the messages with that touch and kind of are able to facilitate, create the change, nudge people to change. That is the next important strategy that we look at in terms of disseminating locally relevant messages for this across. And in today's the whole new media, COVID has especially pushed us a lot to use online digital platforms. But we've over the years also looked at all forms of media, transmedia 360 approaches. We've looked at community level media, including leveraging traditional and folk media art forms. So having a clear messaging strategy in terms of how we effectively use tools and channels, that's another important step. And the other important state level strategy that we would look at, especially Unicef in our partnership with different departments also, has been to be able to create models of change, models of excellence that we can, for example, having model gram panchayats, to be able to work with specific groups that are and to be able to demonstrate change, understand what are those bottlenecks, barriers, what communication media channels work, what messages, what are the norms that actually hindered people from say sustaining a practice that have been adopted, to be able to understand those barriers and bottlenecks better, to be understand what strategies help people shift and how do we shift the narrative at that level, and to be able to scale up and replicate. So that is another important, and to effectively document, share the practices and to scale up. That's another important strategy at the state level. And most importantly, two of the other areas where UNICEF also has been very closely working with is in terms of being able to create that conversation of at various levels, multiple levels, to create platforms for advocacy, whether it's with legislature, with members of the legislature, with media, academia, with research institutions, to be able to create, to pitch for a narrative to say that, so we are able to effectively advocate for policy, to be able to look at how, say, for example, if it's about use of resources to effective allocation of resources, if it's about being able to understand myths and taboos that are actually to be able to make that. So creating advocacy initiatives, another one. And finally, very important across the board is to have targeted campaigns that where we know very specific groups that are left out, that are to be able to reach them to be effectively, because as our efforts to promote demand and to address norms go up, as our communication, as we have learned to effectively use communication tools and media channels, it's important that service delivery reaches there, so that the issue of trust doesn't kind of come up. So it's important to have targeted campaigns that generate demand while services reach there. So overall, across the board, creating convergence, state level, interdepartmental coordination platforms, so the conversation happens within the departmental silos that we work in, that to be able to speak about hygiene as a cross-cutting, like what Dr. Soya says, a cross-cutting determinant that affects health, wellness, and all indicators of human development. In a way, this summarizes the several steps, strategies that at a state level are very important for us to be able to effectively take home the message.
Thank you, Vijay. Very, very rightly put that we really need a systematic approach in planning and then implementing the communication across for be it any behavior, be it hand washing with soap or be it MHM. I'm just going to pick up your last point on convergence, because menstrual hygiene management is also, or rather menstrual hygiene is managed by multiple ministries, be it the Health Ministry, Ministry of Jal Shakti, WCD, Ministry of Education for adolescent and school-going children. And learning show that a holistic approach to MHM is required. Like, for example, I've been working closely with Ministry of Jal Shakti and know that they focus more on the disposal aspect of menstrual waste. But to look at a wide range of communication, which starts from raising awareness on the issue, addressing the taboos and myths, providing information on menstrual absorbents. We have a huge variety of choice now, the hygienic ways of management, and of course the correct practices of disposal. So we see that the communication for MHM is very complex. So coming back to you, Zoya, can you throw some light on what is the best way to build the skills of PRIs for communication in MHM? Especially, focusing that they are able to address the myths and taboos and, somewhere influencing the community to talk about it, shift the norms there, and also enable people to adopt, especially girls, young girls, to adopt these hygiene practices.
Yeah, thanks, Shalini, and thanks for the lovely, I think Vijay spoke very in detail about what the convergences are like. So that's, thank you. It was a very interesting thing. With what Shalini, you have said, it makes my life much easier, because I have to kind of, instead of saying what health can do for menstrual hygiene, it is easy for me to say what Panchayati Raj institution should do. So that makes, I think, my problem much better. So let me begin. I have kind of, I want to enumerate 5-6 things. First thing I would say is that since Panchayat per se is based in the community, so they can start by playing a very significant role in just promoting, facilitating, and just managing adequate wash facilities. And especially, I would say, with these young girls who are reaching menarche, who start their period. So ensuring access to safe and secure spaces. For girls, of course, women is always there, but for girls who are just starting their periods, who will need to change pads, who need to wash their undergarments, who need to dry, if they're using a cloth, who need to dry them or wash the undergarments. So that is something which is a basic. So they should help in ensuring that such safe, secure places with running water and soap is there. First is this. Second, I would say is that besides this, they can also work, since they are in the community, they know what really works, what kind of intervention will work, which will address the societal norms. Like you mentioned about the various taboos and misconceptions about periods, that, okay, during periods, a girl should not say enter the kitchen, should not enter the bedroom, should not use the bed, or should not touch anybody, should not wear new clothes, all kinds of taboos, which all of us know. So they should work to address them in a normative, in a manner in which it is a day-to-day conversation, and say, okay, this is something which is absolutely has no scientific basis, or there's no evidence that this is harmful. So they should begin by having a dialogue within the community where they are about addressing the societal norms, about the taboo topic which you mentioned, and of course, so that gradually the societal norms, they become more progressive, more informed, more scientific evidence-based. Second, that. Third, I would say is that they should also work on raising basic awareness about the importance of hygiene. Like we talked about hand hygiene in the beginning. So the basic information about how important it is to wash hands, to maintain hygiene per se, hygiene separately as well as hygienic behavior during period. So it's both ways. It's about hygiene, normally hand washing and cleaning, and about importance of maintaining menstrual hygiene during periods. That also is a normal talk, and this talk should not just be limited among the PRI members. This should be a normal conversation while they interact with the other villagers, other village men, boys. This has to be a conversation between men and boys and women. Let us not just limit it to the fact that, okay, the PRI, the male should talk to the male and the women should talk to the women. Gradually, I'm not saying that we do a drastic thing, but then this conversation has to happen with the men, who are in most families are the purse holders. So the men should realize it is important for their daughters, their wives, their daughters-in-law, their sisters to have access to safe menstrual hygiene practices. So that is important. And this usually comes down from a position of power. So if the PRI members talk about it among themselves, how important it is for their women in their house to have access to safe menstrual hygiene, this will go a long way. Another platform which we have in adolescent health is called the Adolescent Health and Wellness Day. So this is a quarterly activity which involves all the various gatekeepers of adolescent health, and we talk about issues which are important for adolescents. So in this also, menstrual hygiene is one of the very important topics which is talked about in, I would say, in majority of the states. That is what the reports tell us, that is what the evidence, and a lot of our videos have been shared with us. So it's very important, and in this we would like to involve the panchayats, the village elders should take part in this, so that at least they know what is happening. What are the latest developments, say, about menstrual hygiene, like you mentioned, whether it is a pad, whether it is a menstrual cup, whether it is a cloth pad, a reusable pad, a washable pad. So all those options should be talked, and then that is why whenever we have these kind of events in the villages, these events can be held in villages or in schools, but majority are held in villages. So once they're held, if the panchayat members participate or attend a few of them, it will I think inform them and make them aware about how important every adolescent is, boy or girl. But yes, we're talking about hygiene. So it's how important every adolescent girl is when she's growing. She needs to have access to menstrual hygiene. Next, I would say, is the use of local media. If the panchayat members are having access to the local media platforms, the interpersonal communication, I mean, you are an expert. So all these are there. And these have, I think time and again, these have shown that they are very effective channels. I mean, now with the coming in of social media, we somehow feel that maybe the print media is not important, the newspaper, magazines, the small articles, the radio shows, which I think all of us have grown up listening, these have not become unimportant. They are really not redundant. Let us not make them less important than what they are, because majority of India still does not really use internet, is not on the social media all the time, so they need to have paper printed, they need to listen to the radio, they need to see the TV advertisement, the TV talks. So we need to keep having talks on menstrual hygiene, whether on radio, on TV, in serials, in newspapers, magazines. So this has to continue, and let us not think that these are kind of perishable media products which don't need to be discussed now, but they need to be there, right there, because they keep reiterating that menstrual hygiene is an important agenda for all the women in the country, which is half the population. Next, I would say, of course, social media. Like I mentioned, social media is the next new buzzword, especially with the COVID lockdown. A lot of young boys and girls in villages, their parents, their elders did have access to social media. Their new classes are being held online. So the access to social media has increased. So this may actually help in suppose the village elders have a WhatsApp group. So if they post some very positive information about menstrual hygiene within their own group, say the women do that, and then they talk to the husbands about it, or the young girls do it and they share with their brothers or their parents. So this will kind of normalize, and this will actually help in counter very popular misconceptions which are there, or even comment on the prevailing issues in their whole village about menstrual hygiene. So this also can play a very important role. And I think lastly, I would say that we have a lot of community contact opportunities. You all must be aware about the Village Health and Sanitation Day and Adolescent Health Day I mentioned. These important contact days form, I think, basis of interaction between the healthcare providers, I would say the healthcare providers and the various beneficiaries, whether it is the doctors on one side, ASHA, A&M on one side, and the parents, the elders, the young boys and girls within the community in the villages. So these contact days have to be given due importance, and so that the barriers in access to menstrual hygiene management, barriers to access to information on them, all these barriers are gradually, I would say, broken down, so that it becomes a normative discussion in families as to how every female in the community has access to safe menstrual hygiene practices and I think lives a healthy and happy life. That's it from my side.
Great, Zoya. I think your very relevant point that we need a 360-degree approach, and it's not just that one medium like social media will work, but we definitely need a much wider range and a 360-degree approach when we are looking at complex communication like MHM. And that brings me to Vijay. I mean, how does the state ensure that communication around such complex matters are really contextualized and made meaningful? How do you adapt the materials? Like, what is the evidence base that you get from ground? What are the challenges also, that you face when you are ensuring that communication resources are effectively reached and used by PRIs? If you could throw some light on that, it would be interesting.
Yes, Shalini, sure. I'm just sharing a screen. I have a few slides, but I decided in the interest of time, I'm not going to share all of it, just 3 or 4 short pointers. And
Sure.
again, I'll go back before we go to contextualizing, adapting materials, especially flagship missions have lots of materials that are available on the web platform, easily accessible, all languages, dialects, it's available. And at the state level also, we create a lot more. I think first, again, we'll take a step back to see what are the enablers to generate demand. If at the end of the day, if we look at communication media, media tools, channels as just, products, collaterals that are going to go out, that are going to be pushed from top down, I think we need to look at access to regular and relevant information. This has to be consistent. And we are here about looking at a panchayat level, at the GP level, what is it that one can do? How do we generate demand? How do we change behaviors? How do we shift the narrative on norms? And the basic thing at that level is also to be able to create ownership, participation, to be for the community, to be able to create opportunities for dialogue, positive role models, local models. I mean, yes, fine, big influencers, national media outreach is very important. Stars, Bollywood, cricketers, it's really important to send those messages out. But at that level, for change to happen, for that family, for that individual to change, for that whether it's around hand hygiene or about menstrual hygiene or across the board for all behaviors, we're looking at, and very important when it comes to and for a lot of our materials also talk about services that are offered. So there should be the communication loop needs to be complete. We need to have a feedback mechanism. People need to be able to come back to say that yes, fine, this is a grievance, this is promised, this is to be delivered. And how so our communication, when we contextualize messages at state level, we will have to look at all these enablers. And then at the end of the day, the people who transact at the GP level, whether it's the panchayat functionaries, whether it's a service delivery, the provider, or the across departments of the governments, capacity to be able to transact that communication loop, to be able to engage in that process, that and to be sensitive enough to be able to create sensitization at the community and family level and individual level, and very importantly, to be able to take the conversation across in a convergent manner. Because we just heard from Dr. Zoya about these platforms, community-based platforms, the flagships, the NDD or the IDCF, and it's the same message that goes across. Very similar collaterals that get developed, logos are changed, and same messaging. It's the same mother, the same girl, the same father, brother, that the sarpanch that we go to. So how do we, so at a state level, when we contextualize these enablers are what are going to, and I'm going to quickly talk about a very interesting show. I think it's less than a 2-minute clip. So I think I won't show the slide, I'll show the clip. It's a very interesting initiative we started during COVID, during lockdown, in the middle of communities, the country being shut, and the first wave of COVID kind of really shaking us wide. We looked at how do we take hand washing messaging to the field, how do we tell people, and we also included masking. We also looked at other essential service delivery. We looked at some of the RM and CS plus A service delivery essentials at that point in time. We looked at nutrition related essentials. We looked at other water, sanitation, hygiene, menstrual hygiene related essentials. So we said the most effective manner would be to look at traditional local folk media art forms, in which people would come in the same messaging being contextualized in the language, in the media form, in the art form that people relate to and being taken to them. And with PIB, ROB, with the Bureau of Communication, with the Gujarat government, the various departments of Gujarat government, we put together a campaign where we actually took the messaging locally to the field using outreach vans of whatever, following all COVID protocols, and Panchayats were in partnership. And so at that point in time, there was a lot of outflow of people across the country as well, and there was a lot of quarantining and all that happening. In the middle of all that, we had a team of around 400 plus artists going across the state of Gujarat, in literally every district across 33 districts and most villages across the state, stopping there, giving them critical messages in the language, in the dialect, in the form that they understand and relate to. And I'll just quickly play that one. Okay, that we called it the Kove Vijayara. This was and this was went across the state, and we used.
मुख्यमंत्री ने प्रस्थान कराया था, तब से ये 5 रथ अविरत चल रहे हैं। हर रोज 60 किलोमीटर का अंतर धीरे धीरे पार करते हुए, लोगों का संपर्क बनाते हुए, अपने संदेश को फैलाते हुए ये रथ आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। कलाकारों की कला के जरिए, ट्रेडिशनल आर्ट के जरिए ये संदेश फैलाने का काम अच्छे ढंग से हुआ है।
कोरोना છે ને નાક અને મોઢા દ્વારા એના વાયરસ છે ને એ આપણા શરીરમાં જાય। સર્જનમાં દેલો હોય એમને બીજા શાકભાજી ખાવા જોઈએ, કઠોળ ખાવું જોઈએ, દહીં દૂધ ખાવું જોઈએ। જો આપણે જાગૃત થઈશું તો કોરોના જાય। અને જાગૃતતા કેવી જોઈએ?
The PIB-ROB and Unicef partnership in Gujarat is an effort to take COVID-related risk communication to every corner of Gujarat using the local and folk media forms in these challenging times. The expertise from Center of Excellence in Journalism Department, Gujarat University, has helped craft this message in a culturally sensitive and meaningful manner. Our experience has shown that this method is effective and will be an important tool in the impactful promotion of COVID-appropriate behaviors.
Okay. So just going back to this one, that is one experience I thought rather than showing just quickly crisp, and I'll summarize it in one slide in terms of what is it that we would look at in terms of promote at the GP level. Shalini, we've discussed this. I know in the interest of time, I'm going to quickly. I think we should look at, as we go ahead, look at very specific behavioral insights. We need to be able to create experiments to understand what makes what shifts the narrative, what is it that helps people shift norms, sustain behaviors. We need to be looking at leveraging social platforms. I mean, across the board, across social media platforms today. At every corner, every place in India, there are still pockets that are digital, say technology, media, dark, and still kind of populations that are still not fully savvy. But large percentage is covered. Being able to leverage, especially the power of youth, we should continue to use. I think GPs they would still rely a lot on traditional. There are still several community-based events that are rooted in culture, tradition in those communities. Being able to leverage whether it is our Poshan Ma, whether it is the work in Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, whether it's around across flagships, across even state practice, like in Gujarat, we have every state has its own state flagship schemes. Be able to blend the traditional folk media forms into, be able to continue to use simple media tools. And as I said very clearly, we need to also be able to talk with influencers, like there are faith-based leaders, traditional healers, others, they're being able to send this message across, use them to as partners, engage with them as partners to encourage dialogue, to be able to facilitate discussion dialogue within communities with families. GP level task forces, Dr. Zoya already spoke about the VHSNDs and other platforms that exist. Create the VHSNC, the committee, we should be in a position to work with us from our perspective at a state level, to be able to empower, to be able to effectively work with these task forces, to be able to create corners. I mean, examples such as, for example, MHM corners, similar to breastfeeding corners, and other spaces, safe spaces that we can create for where it is needed. Convergence across functionaries, so that there is uniformity in messaging, there is consistency, reliability, trust in messaging, being able to create community feedback mechanisms, especially when it comes to service delivery, because it's important when we go with a message. Services create their own demand. We know that when we go with very strong push for generating demand, quality of services have to be equally good, so that we don't have dropouts, we don't have lack of trust, or that's important. And locally, for GPs to be able to locally mobilize resources, there are several fund schemes that are available that they can draw resources from. A lot of resources invariably go into first promoting services and infrastructure, building infrastructure. Can we prioritize changing behaviors, that discuss IPC and other dialogue platforms as equally important, and not make it resource incentive? Since you asked about challenges, I think it's time for us to kind of, as practitioners here today, it's a good space today for us to start thinking about how do we decentralize content generation. Can we crowdsource content? Can we support GPs to be able to create content locally and disseminate it? Look at and be mindful of the fact that new media platforms also perpetuate myths and taboos and misinformation. So they have to be empowered. So as we push for greater outreach with communication to media tools and channels, we need to also give them the tools to be able to manage myths, taboos, and misinformation that is going to go out. There is a lot of competing priorities, information overload, fatigue. So as we keep saying that tools, media channels are important, we need to be mindful of the fact that there is a lot of information overload and fatigue. And in the last 2 years, I think each one of us have experienced that personally also. So imagine how the communities are going to feel about it. And we need to be also mindful of that when we want to sustain hand washing, menstrual hygiene, and other behaviors. Technology, media dark platforms, we need to have, we can't go with one solution. We'll have to we have to have 360 transmedia approaches. We need to have all pockets engaged in multiple channels and media, so for platforms, for us to be able to affect the change in a manner that it can sustain on itself, and involving creating those linkages between district taluka administration to effectively engage, to make SBCC communication approaches for social and behavior change a very important part of their planning and implementation, and to create efficient coordination mechanisms. That's something that's very important for us to actually help contextualize these messages. And very important, also one important message is behavior change, social change takes time. A lot of mission mode operation is target driven. I mean, our indicators and what we set, and some of it may not be tangible, may be seen at a much, they would just be path, say for example, intermediate results for a much different. So we need to be mindful of that, and that should, so that's something that I would close with, to say, if we can look at how we consider these challenges while we go ahead and identify media tools and channels and contextualizing messages, it will help us look at a much larger, a much more effective, sustainable change framework. Thanks, Shalini. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Vijay. That really was, really gave us a lot of insight on the challenges, and also from Zoya's insight, we have a better understanding of how the devolution of responsibilities is conceptualized at the national level. From you, Vijay, how the state strategies are creating that enabling environment so that PRIs actually get the resources that are developed, and every kind of help is given to them. There is a bottom-up approach at the state level. Let me bring Soumya into this conversation now, because she from the civil society organization, which is implementing partner for several development agency, really has seen and has deep insights into the field realities. So Soumya, you heard from the representatives of the main Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. You heard from a development partner. Can you share with us how it actually plays out at the ground level, and also what are the challenges there? And before you start, let me also share with everyone that we have more than 350 participants for this session, which is huge, because it's 5 o'clock rather 6 o'clock in the evening, absolutely at the that end of the day. So yes, Soumya, go ahead.
Thanks, Shalini. I think, just in response to your question, and also kind of following up from where Vijay left us with a few thoughts, I'm just going to share a presentation while I talk. But I mean, this is experience that comes from about, work across 14 or 15 different states on various aspects of WASH. So whether it was, hand washing related, whether it's MHM related, whether it's toilet construction related. I think over the years, what we have seen is there are certain sets of aspects related to SBCC engagement that tend to work better. And certain things that kind of pose as challenges. And I thought I could just quickly talk us through a few things that we find has actually worked quite effectively over the years. So I think the first is to actually just use a very wide range of different kinds of participatory methods and approaches as our kind of starting point. And I think over the years, we have seen the evolution of several different kinds of methods. So, in the late 90s and early 2000s, we had the participatory hygiene, sanitation, transformation, engagement work that took off quite extensively globally. Then we had the community-led total sanitation movement. We have participatory wash mapping, action planning, a range of these. And all of them essentially borrow from kind of the core principles of, ensuring that you are reaching the unreached, that you are listening to voices of people that tend to get left on the margins, who also tend to be the people who may have slippages in certain kinds of, better hygiene practices, tend to be people who may have less access to the physical infrastructures itself. So it's largely about trying to see how some of these people living at the margins can actually be brought to the center or the core, or be included in the process of planning itself. So using very simple kind of engagement processes, we found that focusing on specifically disaggregated groups, rather than considering the entire kind of rural community as a monolith, looking specifically at the specific needs of men, women, children, adolescents, older people, people with disability, specific kinds of groups, maybe nomadic communities, passing through some of those communities. Just trying to understand, certain aspects related to what helps and prevents them from using or practicing better health and hygiene practices. And we found that focusing on unpacking some of these challenges, which could be either physical challenges, they could be notional, they could actually be very practical challenges, and emphasizing on, a kind of disaggregated solution building for each of these separate groups, rather than a single solution that kind of works for all. I think it's building up largely from what they know, or what the people living in these different communities know, because their realities are very stark and they're lived realities for them. So they're able to understand what some of that means. And then, through dialoguing and increasing critical consciousness, just trying to build some of that up. I think it's largely also what we have found works in the context of WASH-related engagements, is to ensure that you facilitate access to some accurate and very appropriate information, and help them, I think like Vijay was saying, to kind of collectively change the narrative and be willing to adopt or adapt to a narrative that suits these communities much better. And also, trying, again, like Vijay gave us a few examples, but messages that resonate very specifically for the different groups. So if it is a tribal community or a denotified tribe or nomadic groups, how can we make sure that the way in which we're communicating this message to them is tailored to an understanding that is comfortable to them? So, a very simple example that I can just give in this context is everyone understands the multiple kind of spillover effects of inappropriate hygiene practices. And when you help any group to kind of unpack, what are the health linkages to specific kinds of hygiene behaviors, they are immediately able to link it to, certain inappropriate hygiene or health practices like, inadequate hand washing or no hand washing after defecation or open defecation. They see that it links to children falling ill, it leads to absenteeism, it impacts on children's playtime. With the men and women or working members of the families, they can see an immediate link to the impact on a loss of livelihood. They see women being disproportionately affected. They understand that this is immediately linked to an increased indebtedness because there's a heavy amount of borrowing for treatment, related to health, and how this kind of leads to an additional poverty spiral. So something that would seem very obvious or simple to practitioners is something that the community collectively understands, and then they want to collectively work towards a solution building that ensures that a lot of these impacts are not necessarily seen with any of them. And I think in the context of this entire engagement on community-led planning, I think it's about changing perspectives and mindsets also about who some of these end users are. And I think in the context specifically of the more, of hardware aspects or the more physical infrastructure aspects, I think the easiest thing one of the best things that has worked is when they understand that the person who needs to practice these improved hygiene behaviors or who needs to use an infrastructure is not necessarily an able-bodied man, but someone at the other end of the spectrum, someone such as a Dalit girl with a disability who needs to be able to access or be able to use some of these. I think it immediately creates this understanding and a very different kind of way that even Panchayat members get engaged with ensuring that they now need to build infrastructure which can be accessed by someone who has multiple forms of exclusions. So if something works for a Dalit girl with a disability, it automatically works for the older people, it automatically works for pregnant women, it automatically works for younger children. And there's a greater willingness to want to ensure that there is success for all of these sets of groups. So, even when a lot of these, this entire analogy is something that helps a lot with physical infrastructure. So in the context of open defecation and needing to move to, using toilet spaces, even if you get different people in these different communities to either rank or rate what are the characteristics of an ideal toilet or what would you want your ideal toilet to look like, it's very easy for people living in rural areas to imagine, what this kind of ideal space or infrastructure should be. And I think what we have found in different contexts is that women and adolescent girls have been kind of pioneering and leading the way in doing a lot of work at the Panchayat level. And some of our colleagues, our Sarpanch colleagues who are here, will also be, talking about this in greater detail when they've had a chance to talk about it. Being able to identify community champions has helped to inspire everyone else in communities to follow some of those practices. So whether it is, as diverse a range as single women headed households trying to pioneer toilet construction has been an inspiration for many, personally contributing to kind of build bathing spaces adjacent to toilets, has inspired many others to think about different ways of, locating their own infrastructure. A lot of them have been able to facilitate a lot of door-to-door kind of campaigning. They use song, video, any kinds of, art, things that inspire and help. Also equipping panchayat members or committees that they form with very simple monitoring tools and basic materials to reinforce social and behavior change, social behaviors that need to be changed, has been, extremely helpful. So just a very simple example, like a lot of panchayat committees that have been formed in different parts of, across multiple states, have found it very easy that if they have, let's say, 150 households, I mean, this is a very skewed example, but let's say you have 150 households that you need to map, it's not difficult for them to form committees at the local level that can visit door to door, and across a range of parameters, just look at what have been the hygiene practice changes in these different houses. So whether, a large number of these groups, for example, here, a large number of households had irregular hand washing at whatever periods were required, this was required. They found that with continuously talking to these families with some of the BCC material that they were using, 6 months later, somehow, more houses got regular with it, and then subsequently more did. So I think it's just about creating a very simple tool or mechanism, because it just has the power to be able to help people in a very simplistic way to follow through and feel quite empowered about being able to bring about change that is able to sustain itself. And I think there were just one or two key takeaways that we had on some of the major challenges that we faced. And I think our Sarpanch and NGO partners here will have more to say about this. But we have found that, using shaming as a strategy to kind of reinforce behavior, to kind of sustain, it might be a great trigger to trigger behavior change. But in terms of being able to sustain it, we found that in many ways it has actually ended up reinforcing some of the caste and kind of patriarchal hierarchies in the long run. So it's just a kind of, a warning to kind of beware of this and ensure that we maybe avoid using those kinds of strategies. And I think the second is, there seems to be a bit of a mismatch, for the pace at which decentralization should be happening and the pace at which the SBCC action is actually required at the village level. And because if the decentralized mechanism or process could actually be actioned before the behavior change is actually required, we find that it ends up being far more effective, and then there's no unnecessary capture by power holders within the community groups itself. But I think at this point, maybe I could just stop right here. And हमारे साथ जो हमारे 3 साथी उपस्थित हैं, हम उनको बुलाना चाहेंगे अपनी बात रखने के लिए। तो हमारे साथ सबसे पहले प्रतिमा जी हैं। प्रतिमा कुमारी जी गौरव ग्रामीण महिला विकास मंच से जुड़ी हुई हैं, और ये संस्था जो है बिहार में अलग अलग जगहों पर इन्होंने माहवारी स्वच्छता और कचरा प्रबंधन के संबंध में उन्होंने बहुत सारा काम किया है। तो प्रतिमा जी, अगर आप हमें आपके अनुभव के बारे में थोड़ा बताना चाहेंगी कि माहवारी स्वच्छता और कचरा प्रबंधन के विषय में आपने पंचायत के साथ मिलकर किस तरह से कुछ चुनौतियों का सामना किया था, अगर आप हमें थोड़ा बता सकें।
हेलो, आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
हाँ, बिल्कुल आ रही है।
तो सभी को नमस्ते, मेरा नाम प्रतिमा है और मैं गौरव ग्रामीण से जुड़ी हुई हूँ। सबसे पहले मैं ये बताना चाहूंगी कि हमारे खुद के जो अनुभव रहे हैं जीवन में प्रजनन एवं यौन स्वास्थ्य को लेके, उन समस्याओं से निकल के हमने एक संकल्प लिया कि हम तो इन समस्याओं से जूझे, लेकिन आने वाले जो समय है उसमें हम कम से कम अपने आने वाली पीढ़ियों को नहीं जाने देंगे। उसी नजरिए से हमने प्रजनन एवं यौन स्वास्थ्य के ऊपर काम शुरू किया था। और उसी के में एक हिस्सा है जिसपे हम मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन एंड के ऊपर काम करते हैं कि माहवारी स्वच्छता एवं उसका प्रबंधन कैसे किया जाए। तो ये हमारा जो अलग अलग टूल है, जैसे फुटबॉल के थ्रू हम काम करते हैं लड़कियों के साथ, तो उनके साथ जब हम जुड़ रहे थे उसी समय ये लगा कि और केवल लड़कियों को बताने से नहीं होगा, बल्कि ये टैबू जो है वो सभी जगह है, चाहे वो हमारे घर में हो, परिवार में हो या इंस्टीट्यूशन में हो। वहीं से हम लोगों ने परिवार के साथ भी बात करी और इंस्टीट्यूशन में सबसे पहला हम लोगों ने पंचायती राज इंस्टीट्यूशन को चुना और वहां पे जो हम लड़कियों को बताते थे और लड़कियों की जो समस्याएं थी और जो टैबूज थे, हम उनको लेकर के आते थे और फिर हम उनके साथ भी शेयर करते थे, जो हमारे पंचायत प्रतिनिधि हैं, कि इसको कैसे कम किया जाए इन टैबूज के साथ। और फिर उनको भी थोड़ा ट्रेंड करते थे कि इन विषयों पे हमें क्यों जरूरत है बात करने की। और इसमें वो बहुत शुरुआत में तो इतना चुनौती था कि ज्यादातर जो पंचायती राज में जो आते थे प्रतिनिधि, हमने उनमें महिला और पुरुष दोनों को रखा था। तो महिलाएं तो थोड़ा इन्वॉल्व होती थी, बात करती थी, लेकिन जो पुरुष थे उनको लगता था कि कहाँ इन फालतू की चीजों में हमें बैठा के रखे हो। इंटरेस्ट नहीं था या शर्माते थे या इन विषयों पे बात करने पे उठ के चले जाते थे। लेकिन जब हम ये अपने जीवन की बातें उनको बताई कि भाई मैं कैसे इससे प्रभावित रही और मेरा जीवन किस तरीके से इसकी स्वच्छता और साफ सफाई या जानकारी के अभाव में कैसे बीमार पड़ी, तो यहाँ से हमने शुरू किया था कि कहानियां हम लेके आते थे अपने या आसपास में जो गांव में घटित समस्याएं हैं उनकी, और फिर वहां से वो लोग संवेदनशील बने और फिर उसमें रुचि लेना शुरू किए। और बहुत सारे ऐसे कार्यक्रम में वो पंचायत प्रतिनिधि भी हमारे साथ शामिल रहे हैं। जैसे हम गांव में रैलियां निकालते थे, नारे लगाते थे इन विषयों पे, तो उसमें हमारे पंचायत प्रतिनिधि भी रहते थे और वो भी चर्चा के साथ साथ इन रैलियों में भी शामिल होते थे और लोगों को बोल पाते थे कि ये कितना अहम मुद्दा है जिंदगी का। अगर हम महिला और पुरुष दोनों के जीवन की बात करते हैं तो अधिकांश जो पुरुष हैं वो भी घर में जो महिलाएं बीमार हैं तो उनसे प्रभावित होते रहते हैं। तो इन विषयों पे काम करना चाहिए और काफी लोग जुड़े और इसमें काफी सुझाव भी हमें आए कि आगे कैसे इसको करना चाहिए। तो स्कूलों में किस तरीके से हमें ले जाना चाहिए, स्कूलों में कैसे बात करनी चाहिए। तो शिक्षकों के साथ भी हमने काम किया और वहाँ पे जो सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप था उनके साथ भी काम किया था। ये तो किस तरीके से काम किया है वो बताया, लेकिन इसका प्रभाव जो था वो एक बॉन्डिंग बन पाई आपस में लड़कियों की कि वो इन विषयों पे तो बात करते ही थे, लेकिन जब समस्याएं आई या जानकारी चाहिए तो पीएचसी तक वो लोग जाकर के बात करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे। लेकिन वहां पे देखा जाए तो वहां भी शुरुआती दौर में बहुत मुश्किलें थी कि लड़कियां ऐसे जा करके और इन विषयों पे बात कर रहे हैं, तो थोड़ा वहां भी एक स्टिग्माइज किया जाता था। तो वहां भी हम लोगों को, जब हम लोगों ने जीएलपी किया, ग्राउंड लेवल पैनल जो लड़कियों का बनाए, फिर वहां से हम लोगों ने पंचायती राज इंस्टीट्यूशन के सामने रखा और फिर इन लोगों को ले जाकर के फिर पीएचसी में हम लोगों ने इन बातों को रखा, तब जाके उनके अंदर एक अवेयरनेस आया और वो लोग मानने लगे कि हाँ ये लड़कियां जो हैं जागरूक हैं, इसलिए आकर के इन विषयों के बारे में बात करती हैं। ये उनकी जागरूकता की बात थी। अब महामारी में हम लोग बताते क्या क्या थे, तो हम वो पर थोड़ा सा उस पर बात करना चाहेंगे कि जैसे एक तो है कि ये आता कैसे है, होता कैसे है, कितना भ्रांतियों को तोड़ने का जो मिथ्य है उस पर काम किया, और उसके बाद था कि इसकी साफ सफाई कैसे रखें। तो हमें बिल्कुल, हमने किसी भी ब्रांड या इनका बिना नाम लिए, हमने बिना सैनिटरी पैड, हम साधन बताते थे कि हाँ ये साधन हो सकते हैं। तो सबसे ज्यादा जो हमारे फील्ड में देखा जाए, हम 35 गाँव में काम जो हमने इस पे किया है, वह अभी भी आपको साफ सफाई के साथ कपड़ा वाला ही आपको ज्यादा मिलेगा, क्योंकि हम सबसे गरीब परिवारों तक काम करते हैं, मुसर परिवार तक काम करते हैं। तो वो इनको कैसे वापस से साफ करके कड़ी धूप में सुखा करके और एक कपड़े का रीयूज करते हैं, वो ज्यादातर हमने ये किया था। साथ ही जो लोग इस्तेमाल करते थे, कुछ लोग पहले से भी जो थोड़े से अवेयर थे, तो उनको कैसे वो उस कचरे का निपटारा कैसा करना है, उसके ऊपर भी हम लोगों ने बात करी। और देखा जाए तो स्कूलों में सबसे बड़ी समस्या उस समय आ रही थी कि हम घर में तो ठीक है हम उसका प्रबंधन करेंगे, स्कूलों में कैसे करें। तो स्कूलों में ये उस समय का सुझाव आया था कि स्कूलों में डस्टबिन होना ही चाहिए, और वहाँ भी कम से कम रेगुलर बेसिस पे जो एक शिक्षक हैं उनको इसके बारे में जानकारी होना चाहिए, और वो सहज हो ताकि लड़कियां जाके उनसे बात करें। और कुछ तो संसाधन वहाँ पे होने चाहिए कि इमरजेंसी में किसी को आ गया तो पैड वगैरह दे सके। तो हम लोगों ने इस विषय पे भी काम किया, जिसका असर जो दिखता है कि टीचर्स भी कुछ संवेदनशील हुए और हमारे कार्यक्रम का हिस्सा बन पाए। और अगर सुझाव में अगर हमें कहेंगे तो मैं यही कहूंगी कि जो भी जनप्रतिनिधि हैं, जो मेरे अनुभव रहे हैं कि उनको इस तरीके की ट्रेनिंग्स नहीं है, जैसे मुझे भी ट्रेनिंग्स नहीं थी, मुझे किसी भी सरकारी कार्यक्रम के तहत आज तक ट्रेनिंग नहीं मिली है। मुझे चाहे वो प्रैक्टिस हो, ऑक्सफैम हो, क्रिया हो, इन संस्थाओं के द्वारा पैकार्ड हो, इनके द्वारा हमें इन विषयों की ट्रेनिंग मिली, और हम जाकर के अपने कम्युनिटी में अपने पंचायत प्रतिनिधि हो या हर एक स्टेक होल्डर को बता पाते हैं। तो मुझे लगता है कि बहुत जरूरी है कि पंचायती राज जो एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन हमारा जो वहाँ का स्थानीय निकाय है, उनको जरूर इन चीजों के बारे में अवेयर करे, ट्रेंड करे। और वहाँ जो कचरा प्रबंधन का ऑलरेडी काम चलता है, तो हमें लगता है कि इस प्रबंधन पे भी बात होनी चाहिए। और इस प्रबंधन पे बात करते हुए प्रत्येक स्कूलों को में एक तो है कि डस्टबिन हो, और साथ ही मुझे लगता है कि इन्वायरमेंटल फ्रेंडली निपटारे की बात ज्यादा सोची जाए और कही जाए। मुझे आज के लिए इतना ही बात करना था, तो थैंक यू।
ठीक है, थैंक्स
कोई सवाल होंगे तो मैं ले सकती।
जी, थैंक यू वेरी मच प्रतिमा जी। हमारे साथ हमारे दो सरपंच साथी भी जुड़े हुए हैं। हमारी एक पंचायत प्रधान रेखा जी हैं जो को पंचायत से हैं, चित्रकूट उत्तर प्रदेश से, और रेखा जी भी प्रतिमा जी की तरह पंचायत प्रधान बनने से पहले माहवारी स्वच्छता के विषय पर अपने गाँव में बहुत सारा काम करती थी। लेकिन रेखा जी, अगर आप हमें ये बता सकें कि आपके सरपंच बनने के बाद आपने माहवारी स्वच्छता और कचरा प्रबंधन के विषय में कौन कौन सी ऐसी चीजें की हैं जिससे आपको लगता है कि ये बातें सतत रह सकती हैं, और हमें क्या लगता है कि सरकारी विभागों के तरफ से इनको सतत रखने के लिए हमें किन किन चीजों की जरूरत ज्यादा पड़ती है?
जी, मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
जी रेखा जी आ रही
है। रेखा जी,
मैं रेखा बोल रही हूँ, और मैं ग्राम प्रधान कोष से हूँ। मेरे जो अनुभव रहे हैं, मैंने शुरू में तो बहुत संघर्ष किया है, शायद संघर्ष करके ही मैं बाहर निकली हूँ। और काफी मतलब महिलाओं के साथ पहले मैं घर के अंदर ही रहती थी। मुझे इन सब चीजों का खुद, क्योंकि मैं अपने जब ससुराल आई तो मैंने देखा कि मेरे परिवार में ही मतलब इस तरह का बिहेवियर हो रहा है। जैसे मेरी एक नंद थी तो वो कपड़ा का इस्तेमाल करती थी, और जो है बीच में राख का इस्तेमाल करती थी, क्योंकि गांव में ज्यादातर लोग राख का इस्तेमाल करते हैं। कहते हैं कि कपड़ा मतलब राख लेने से दिक्कत नहीं होती है। फिर मैंने जब काफ़ी दिक्कत हुई उसको, मेरी नंद को एक बार काफ़ी दिक्कत हो गई थी, तो फिर मैंने जो है उस पे बात किया और कहा कि ये नुकसान करेगा, और इस पे फिर मैंने उनकी समझ बनाई तो मान तो गए। लेकिन फिर मैंने कहा कि अगर मेरे घर में इस तरह हो रहा है तो मेरे आस-पास पड़ोस में भी ऐसे हो रहा होगा। फिर मैंने इसी तरह से बाहर धीरे-धीरे बात करना शुरू किया, बाहर निकलना शुरू किया। और मैं ज़्यादा तो नहीं बताऊँगी क्योंकि मैं पहले बता चुकी हूँ। लेकिन फिर इसी तरह मेरी पहचान बनी, और पहचान बनने के बाद फिर मैं जब मैं प्रधानी का चुनाव आया 2021 में, तो फिर मैं प्रधान बनी। लेकिन प्रधान बनने के बाद ये हुआ कि जिस तरह से मैंने स्कूल में और आंगनबाड़ी केंद्र में अपनी पहचान बनाई और टीचर से मतलब अपनी पहचान बनाई, लड़कियों से मैंने बात किया, आंगनबाड़ी केंद्र में भी जाकर के मैंने आंगनबाड़ी कार्यकर्तियों से बात किया। जैसे वहाँ महिलाएं आती थी, मैंने महिलाओं के साथ भी इस चीज को लेकर बात किया कि साफ सफाई और महामारी के दौरान ये सब चीजों का प्रयोग ना करें और कपड़ा साफ लें, क्योंकि गांव में तो सैनिटरी पैड जो है ये अलाउ मतलब ज्यादा उपलब्ध नहीं है, क्योंकि पैसा ज्यादा लगता है, तो लोग जो है उसका इस्तेमाल नहीं करते हैं, ना ही घर में कोई उनके लिए लेके देता है। तो साफ सफाई का ध्यान रखें, कपड़े का इस्तेमाल करें। फिर इसके बाद जब मैं प्रधान बनी तो फिर मैंने जो एनम है वहाँ एनम आती रही हैं, तो उनसे मैंने संपर्क बनाया और फिर उनसे उनके द्वारा मैंने जब जहाँ पर जैसे टीकाकरण होता है और जैसे अस्पतालों में भी अगर जा करके फिर महिलाओं को जानकारी मतलब उन्होंने दिया, बीच में जैसे उनके साथ जो है एक मीटिंग बैठक करवाया। तो इस तरह से अवेयरनेस, और जो एक तो देखा जाए गाँव में क्या होता है, जो कपड़ा लेते हैं ना वैसे फेंक देते हैं, खुले में फेंक देंगे, गंदी जगह में मतलब गंदगी फैलाएँगे, तो उसको लेकर के जैसे कचरा जो कचरादान है, उनको बताया कि कचरेदान में डालो या पन्नी में भर के और पेपर में जैसे लपेट कर उसको फेंक सकते हैं, ताकि वो खुली जगह में ना रहे। तो इस तरह से मैंने जो है लोगों को बताया है।
जी, बहुत-बहुत शुक्रिया रेखा जी। हमारे साथ पंचायत प्रधान अभिषेक जी भी इस चर्चा में शामिल हैं। अभिषेक जी कहलगांव से हैं, जो भागलपुर बिहार का एक गांव है। अभिषेक जी, आपने भी आपके सरपंच बनने से पहले आपने बहुत सारे स्वच्छता के विषय पर बहुत सारा काम किया हुआ है, लेकिन क्या आप हमें मुख्य रूप से ये बता सकते हैं कि जो हाथ सफाई का काम और स्वच्छता के विषय पर आपने जो जो काम किए हैं गांव पे, और इस व्यवहार परिवर्तन संचार को जो के बारे में जो आपको जानकारी मिलती है, इस पे अगर आप हमें थोड़ा बता सकें कि आपने किस तरह का काम किया है और लोगों तक आपने इन मैसेजेस को किस तरह पहुंचाए हैं।
गुड इवनिंग एवरीबॉडी। मैं माई सेल्फ अभिषेक अर्नव, मैं बिहार के भागलपुर जिले के सबौर प्रखंड के ममलखा ग्राम पंचायत का भी मुखिया हूँ वर्तमान में। और मैं लगातार छोटी सी उम्र में, जिसमें हम स्कूल में भी पढ़ते थे या कॉलेज में भी, हमेशा हमको लगता था दूसरों को हेल्प करना चाहिए, कुछ न कुछ उसको बताना चाहिए। और जब मेरा पढ़ाई पूर्ण हुआ तो हम फिर पिताजी डेथ होने के बाद हम गाँव लौटे। गाँव लौटने के दौरान हमने देखा गांव में बहुत सारी दिक्कत हैं, जो कि अभी भी दिक्कत हैं और पहले भी दिक्कत था। लड़कियों को पढ़ाना नहीं चाहते थे, तो वहाँ पे हम लोगों ने बेटी बचाओ बेटी पढ़ाओ के लिए बहुत कुछ न कुछ कार्यक्रम किए, सेमिनार लगवाए। उसके बाद स्वच्छता पे कुछ न कुछ हम लोगों ने जागरूक किए, जन जागरूकता के माध्यम से, पेंटिंग के माध्यम से, लोकगीत के माध्यम से, और स्कूल में जा जाके बच्चों सबको स्वच्छता और हैंड वॉश के बारे में बताए, ताकि हैंड वॉश जो है कोरोना के पहले भी जरूरी था और कोरोना के बाद भी जरूरी है। इसलिए कि क्योंकि हम कोई भी काम करके आते हैं तो कीटाणु से हमारा हाथ में कहीं भी पसीना पहुंच रहे हैं तो उसमें सारा वायरस या कीटाणु रहता है, तो उसको कोई भी खाना खाने से पहले हैंड वॉश जरूरी है। कोई भी शुभ काम करने से पहले भी हम लोग ऐसा भी हाथ हम लोग धोते हैं। और स्वच्छता के बारे में हम लोगों ने बताया। अभी भी गांव में सामूहिक शौचालय की व्यवस्था धीरे धीरे हम लोग कर रहे हैं, और पहले भी जन
आपका माइक बंद हो गया है सरपंच जी।
हेलो,
हाँ
अब आवाज आ रही है।
हाँ, बीच बीच में हम लोगों ने जहाँ पे जो कि नल जल की योजना थी, वहाँ पे हम लोगों का एक उद्देश्य है अभी वर्तमान में कि वहाँ पे स्टैंड हैंड वॉश स्टैंड लगाया जाए। एक होता है हैंड वॉश स्टेशन, हम लोगों के गांव में भी एक बनना चाहिए, इससे लोगों को सुविधा मिल सके। और जहाँ तक रही कूड़ा कचरा, हम लोग जिधर में तिधर फेंक देते।
सरपंच जी फिर से आपका म्यूट हो गया। हाँ।
डस्टबिन भी वहाँ पे लगा के हम लोग उस पे काम कर सकते हैं। और जागरूकता फैला सकते हैं। और महिलाओं के लिए जैसे सैनिटरी पैड के बारे में बहुत ही जागरूक करना पड़ा हम लोगों को। और अभी भी बहुत सारे महिला शर्माते हैं बोलने में, खास करके लड़कियों गांव में। और जहाँ तक हमारा इलाका जो यहाँ पे ईंट भट्टा का जो काम होता है, तो वहाँ पे जो मजदूर के टाइप के बच्चे हैं उसको शिक्षा के लिए प्रेरित करना, बाल विवाह को रोकना, बाल श्रम को भी रोकना। इसके लिए हम लोगों ने कई संस्थाओं से, सरकारी गैर सरकारी संस्थाओं से मिलके कुछ न कुछ गांव में कार्यक्रम करवाते हैं, ताकि बाहर से जो आदमी आते हैं उसके
सरपंच जी फिर से
उसको। और हम लोग का यही लक्ष्य है कि पूरे पंचायत को एक अच्छा पंचायत बनाना है, आदर्श पंचायत बनाना है। और सरकार के द्वारा जो भी चलाया जा रहा है स्वच्छता अभियान, उसको पूर्ण रूप से हम लोग मिलकर करेंगे। और स्वच्छता के लिए हैंड वॉश या जो भी उससे रिलेटेड है, पंचायत प्रधान होने के नाते गांव में नल जल की समस्या, स्वच्छता को लेके, पूरा पीठ को लेके, स्वच्छ पीठ को लेके, और वर्षा जल संचय को लेके हर चीज हम लोग गांव में कुछ न कुछ करते रहते हैं। मैम
शुक्रिया अभिषेक जी। अभिषेक जी, रेखा जी और प्रतिमा जी, आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया जुड़ने के लिए। हम चर्चा की इस पहलू को यही बंद करते हैं। शालिनी, ओवर टू यू। अगर हमारे कुछ सवाल हो आपके लिए तो आप जरूर बने रहिएगा।
थैंक यू सो मच सौम्या और प्रतिमा जी, रेखा जी और अभिषेक जी को बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। अपना समय निकाल के यहाँ आए, यहाँ पार्टिसिपेट किए। बहुत बार ऐसा होता है कि इस तरह के जो सेशंस होते हैं उसमें हम जो एक्चुअली ग्राउंड में काम कर रहा होता है उससे नहीं सुन पाते हैं, और वहाँ के क्या चैलेंजेस हैं, वहाँ एक्चुअली क्या काम हो रहा है उसके बारे में हम नहीं जान पाते हैं। So these are very extremely valuable insights that have really helped us to understand, what are the complexities and barriers when we are communicating about, especially about hand hygiene and menstrual hygiene management. After listening to them, it has really given us a glimpse of the hard work and the effort that PRIs, put in to be, role models. They are supposed to be role models because they are elected and they are at the same time managing all the challenges while championing these causes. And thank you a lot, Soumya, for really bringing up the participatory approach mode that is really required if we really need to, go forward with community engagement, mobilization, and, which will only lead to sustained change over a period of time. Rahul, do we have time for any questions, or otherwise I will go to wrapping up this session?
Ma'am, we only have one question. We can take, otherwise that participant will.
Okay.
Yes.
So actually, Nitya also had one question. So maybe Nitya, would you like to come in and ask your question? She's one of our attendees.
Hi, hello everyone. It's been a great session so far. I just had a quick question for Ms. Zoya. Basically, I wanted to know, as we saw, there are a lot of stakeholders that come into play when we're looking at how MHM and hand hygiene actually play out on the ground. So how would you think we can improve convergence at every level, really, to ensure that hand hygiene and MHM service delivery is a little more effective and a little more equitable?
Okay. Oh, I think that's $1 million question, Nitya, you've asked. But I would go ahead and say that if you look at the health of a young growing girl, there's so many ministries which are involved, so many departments, whether it is education, whether it is health, whether it is women and child, whether it is like Panchayati Raj, urban development, rural development, all of them are somehow directly or indirectly involved in the growing girl. So the convergence, I would say, has to begin at the center. We at the center, we do have, I mean, I'm being honest here, we do have convergence meetings with the other ministries in which we do discuss as to how we can better approach our beneficiaries, whether in schools, whether in Anganwadi. So that happens. And second thing is, besides meeting, we also have a lot of health programs in which we try and involve and build the capacities of the people who are implementing these programs. So whether it is teachers in schools who we try and train, whether it is Anganwadis who are Anganwadi workers who are in the Anganwadi centers, whether it is even our own health workers. So you must have heard of the AAA, the Anganwadi, Asha, and the ANM. Right. These three of them are involved in a lot of program implementation. So a lot of our training for the field level implementation covers these three people. So we believe that if the health worker, the and the woman and child, the Anganwadi workers are well trained in any program, whether it is our adolescent program or maternal health, any program, if they are well trained, then the implementation becomes easier in the field. But involving of the teachers is also very essential, because that is where every girl spends about 7 to 8 hours every day. So if we don't involve the teachers, we are, I think, doing a great disservice, because I would say training a teacher is not just changing her mindset, changing the way she thinks per se, and she influences the entire, her own family also and the community, but the way when she transacts with all of these growing girls and boys in the school, because if you don't involve the boys, you really cannot manage menstrual hygiene. It's not really only a girl thing. So you have to involve the boys, you have to tell them so that they become better, I would say, better brothers, better later on, better parents, better community members. Because I mean, we have to get out of the whole fact that menstruation is something which only women discuss, or we should kind of discuss behind closed doors so that no man of the house should know. So that thing has to stop. And the way to stop is to, I think, begin in school, so that youngest of boys, whether it is, I think, class 5, I mean, we would say, in fact, we should begin at the earliest, but maybe reproductive health chapters can start in class 4, 5, so that every boy in his class, if he sees a girl carrying a pad out into the bathroom, he's not, he's not wondering what it is. He should be comfortable saying, okay, yeah, my sister at home uses it, my mother uses it, I've seen it, and it's comfortable. So once that happens, that is a step one of involving teachers. And then I would say involving teachers now, as the scenario is now, we have to involve the teachers in the colleges as well, because you begin in schools now, but then the people who have reached colleges have not been sensitized, have not been oriented. So the whole fact of involving the teaching cadre per se, whether it's schools, whether colleges, and I would say, I mean, even specialist cadre, specialist colleges, whether it's engineering, management, doctors, this huge taboo is there everywhere. It's not just that. I would say even in medical college, when we were studying, even we as medical students, we never discuss about menstrual hygiene, which is so shameful. It's like, okay, menstrual hygiene, you're having periods and you can carry your pad in the hostel, but then I mean, just discussion over a cup of tea was never there. So this has to be normalized. And everybody, whether it is in the villages, aapke jo panchayat ke log ji pradhan hai, Abhishek ji was there, Sarita, the other panchayat leaders also, like the lady talked about ki kapda istemal hota hai, wo bahut common cheez hai, and we all know ki in a lot of villages.
Are you muted, Zoya?
Okay, so at least the girl who's using the kapda should know कि कपड़ा इस्तेमाल करना ठीक है. It's not कि आपको disposable नहीं है तो कोई problem है. आप लेकिन कपड़ा इस्तेमाल कैसे करिए, उसको wash करिए, धूप में use करिए, and then you can use it for at least 3 times. So ये information जाना, तभी what Nitya said, it's a humongous task. I do realize, but you have to keep having this dialogue again and again. And thanks Shalini for inviting me here. You have to talk to the village elders, you have to talk to the teachers, you have to talk to our own doctors, so that they are comfortable in talking about the health of a growing girl. And I think that's what I have to say.
Excellent, Zoya, thank you so much. And one more pointer, what will you take from this session to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare? Because I think this was a very enriching session.
The pointer is, I would say the pointer is that a lot of times the doctors feel that we know too much, but we don't actually know too much. So even though in the health ministry, you have to realize that people who are out there, who are working in the field, who are working with the beneficiaries, with the women, with the girls and the men, know far more about the reality of the ground. So there has to be a constant dialogue with the people who are implementing programs in the state, in the field, as well as come back to the board at the ministry level, so that whenever programs we are making have to translate into action in the field. So many times we have to change our program, which is fine. I think we have to accept that not all programs are perfect, so that if we agree they're not perfect, we can at least take the step forward and change the program so that it becomes more accessible, more equitable, and more affordable for everybody for whom the program is being planned.
Thanks a lot, because we've actually run out of time. It's already 6:45. But thank you all so much. This has been an extremely enriching session, and I just want to wrap up with few words what has really come out, and of course we will make a detailed note of what has emerged out of this session. But definitely what has come out very clearly that, with decentralization, with devolution of powers, the responsibilities and accountabilities of PRIs have increased to their community. So it is absolutely critical that we also make, equal amount of investments in skilling them, in building their capacities, especially say for participatory communication in the new age digital media communication, enhance their understanding of what is a multi-channel approach, and then see what are the results for community engagement, for mobilization, for wider social mobilization, so that PRIs, when they are equipped with these communication tools and materials, support aids, we can harness much more potential of this, community leaders. So with that, I think we come to a close of this session. Shelly, would you like to add something to that? And of course, a huge thanks again to Pradhans who actually participated in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shalini. This is such a rich and very enriching sessions. May I request all speakers to kindly on their videos so that we can take a group picture?
Okay.
Request all the speakers to kindly on the cameras.
Shelly, Shelly, if I could just repeat that in Hindi. सभी से एक रिक्वेस्ट है, अगर आप बस अपना कैमरा 1 मिनट के लिए ऑन कर सकें, हमें एक ग्रुप फोटो लेना था. तो अभिषेक जी, प्रतिमा जी और रेखा जी.
अभिषेक जी तो अभी ऑन किए थे, फिर कुछ
नहीं हो रहा है.
Meanwhile, can you help me spotlighting?
हाँ, हो गया.
प्रतिमा जी को मैं रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ.
प्रतिमा जी, अगर आप भी वहां हो तो अगर आप बस अपना कैमरा एक बार. थैंक यू.
हाँ, अरे बंद हो गया फिर.
Thank you so much. So with this, we conclude this session. Such a very enriching session for all of us. We have more than 350 people listening to this session. Thank you all the participants for joining this session. I also thank our facilitators as well as rapporteurs from WaterAid for supporting this session. Thank you once again for joining the third session of day 2 in the Emuna Hall. Looking forward to see you all tomorrow in the Ganga Hall. The first plenary of the day will start at 2 p.m. and this plenary will be conducted in the Ganga Hall. Please do join us for this plenary and do not forget to take your selfie in the selfie booth. And also, I want to let you know that this certificate for participating in the conclave will be available after the closure of the conclave tomorrow at the 6:30 p.m. Thank you all. Good evening. Signing off, Shaili. Bye.
Thank you, Shelly. Bye.
Thank you, man.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
All the way left side. Everyone is connecting.